Have you set a course for your life? Do you do that every day? Knowing what you want is intention. Knowing how to get there is a study in conscious action. This is a show about living consciously. It is about our choices, our hopes, our dreams, our work, our loves, our vision, and the practice of healing and becoming. Welcome to Cruising in the Light and Shadow. Hello, I am Sheila Keecha Marie.
And I am Inanna Moon. Welcome. And I am very excited to introduce a friend, someone I've known for a very long time. His name is Dennis George Rudolph. And to get started, please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Hello. Okay. If I describe what I do publicly at this point,
Yes.
what I do is a combination of teaching and readings. So I do what are usually advertised as psychic readings or tarot readings. And I say they're advertised that way because I'm not usually the one doing the advertising. So I just
Yes,
go along with however
correct.
they want to bill it.
Yes.
And it can involve tarot. It used to be the tarot was the main focus. Now it's brought in as needed. It's psychic reading, it's energetic reading, it's remote viewing, it's
Ooh,
whatever
remote viewing.
whatever name it wants to go by.
Channeling. I would add channeling to a certain extent. Or mediumship.
So yeah, sometimes talking with dead people, or talking with, or other discarded entities. Sometimes getting out of the way and they pop in and start
Ooh.
using me as a mouthpiece. But I don't think of it as mediumship so much because I tend to think of mediumship as being in a particular
Frame of
frame, a
reference.
tradition that began with the Fox sisters in the 1840s.
Ah,
and,
yes.
Yes.
moved on. And there's ways of doing that have grown up within that, sort of have become somewhat traditional. The ways that I do it tend to go back to older Western and Northern European ways that have their roots in what's been called the fairy traditions. And even before I knew that's what it was called, that's where these ways were coming from. And a lot of the things I do, while some of it was taught by humans, and I learned some very traditional ways through human teachers,
Yes.
a lot of it has also just come directly from the fairy realms. And some of that is teachable, and some of that I wouldn't know how to teach. I just do.
You just know.
Yeah, just do it.
And I'm sorry, before we get into that, I don't know, this question popped into my mind. I have a theory that a lot of our spiritual teachers, like yourself, and just spiritual beings, are performers, actors, singers, dancers, musicians prior to going down this path. Am I right? Am I close with you?
Sort of. I've been on the path since I was a kid, so but only doing it publicly since the early 90s, just a few years before I met Inanna. But yeah, in the 80s, I was doing music, playing in punk bands. In fact, driving into Burbank, this is one of the places where I'd sometimes come to practice. was not too far from here.
Okay. Well, see, there goes my theory. There's, I've got to write a book or something about all the spiritual people in my life that were also former actors or musicians.
Or still are.
Or still are, yeah.
As a matter of fact.
So, the fairy realm.
Yes. Well, let me ask about. So I got to know you. I was looking for another tarot teacher. I had been studying the tarot. I had been in healing practices and teaching meditation and so forth. And I was looking for one more tarot teacher because I stayed with this one for a very, very long time. And I was living in Arcadia at that time and came across Look Within.
Which is a store?
Yes, it was a metaphysical, it was a wellness center. Spiritual wellness center is the way
I love that.
Rebecca
The
would
front
said
section
it.
was a bookstore. The back section was a big room with had all kinds of events
Workshops.
And in between were a couple of rooms that were used for readings and other things.
Yes, yes. And I always, I don't know that you know this, I always say my last tarot teacher was Dennis, which of course, actually, I would say the same thing. I'm still learning the tarot. And every client, every spirit guide, it's like, oh, is that how you use this card and what that means? But you were my last physical tarot teacher, and the one who shoved me, you and Rebecca shoved me out of the nest. Is basically it.
Yeah, Rebecca was very good at that. She
Was she the owner?
Yes.
she was the owner,
Yes.
and she
Rebecca Gutierrez. I
Ooh.
don't think she'll mind.
and she
saying
and she
her name.
no, she's still, I think she still has the website lookwithin.com, and she does some public speaking
Yes.
from time to time.
Oh, cool.
But she had the bookstore Healing Arts Center roughly from 91 or 92 until, what was it, 97? I think 97 or 98,
Thereabouts,
somewhere
yes.
thereabouts.
Yeah.
And I'd say quite a few people got their start. Yet got their start there. She was very good at observing people, and
Yes.
was very selective about who she allowed to work in the store. And
Yes.
about the time one of our tarot classes finished, somebody had just moved on from doing readings at the store. And I remember she told me, I'm thinking that one.
And I had no idea she had
Interesting.
been listening or watching.
Oh,
That
she-
was-
yeah,
that
and
was- that is Rebecca.
Yeah. I said, yeah, that one. And then I remember when she told you, because I was there when she told you that she wanted to hire you on, and you said, well, okay. And I remember, wow, I'm like a proud papa. You've gone from being a student to being competition.
Little did I know that was going on.
I was totally joking about that. There is no competition in this. There is no competition. There's no competition. Well, I know that there are
No.
some who see it in a competitive way. I've never seen it in a competitive way. Not serious. I joked a little bit,
Yes, no.
but it was totally
I
a
know
joke
you're
because
joking, yeah.
because everybody who needs a reading, a healing, magic work, some kind of help in some way with this, they're going to find who's right for them.
Exactly.
And the more of us there are to do that can do it right, do it effectively, do it with ethics and with effectiveness,
Yes.
everybody will be able to find a fit for them.
Exactly.
And so there's no competition.
I also wanted to ask you, or just because I'm learning where you are now as opposed to where you were then, but
Yeah,
you
it's
were also,
evolved a bit,
Yeah,
yeah.
it has evolved indeed. You were the first. I had certainly done ritual before, but shamanism was what came in with you. And how
Yeah.
did you view it then, and how do you view shamanic practice now?
Ooh.
In the early 90s, I began doing drum circles 1993, I think it was. And I called it shamanic because that's what the woman I had learned these ways from at that time was calling it. It was and when I read the literature, Mircea Eliad's Shamanism,
Yes.
Michael Harner's The Way of the Shaman, Michael Drake, The Shamanic Drum,
Yes.
various other useful books. At the time, they kind of informed what I was doing at the time, and they fit a model. Now, what do I do now is directly within a tradition that doesn't use the term shaman or shamanic, because the term is basically from the Tungus people of Siberia and originally is specific to their ways and practices. Anthropologists have taken it and applied it to a group of similar traditions worldwide that have to do with going into other worlds, going into those worlds to meet allies and teachers and those who can be part of a working team. And then the third part of that the anthropologists use to label something as shamanic is that these practices are used to help people in this world through healing, through magic, through helping the crops grow or whatnot. So that's what the original idea of shamanism was and what it has become. In the meantime, around the world, there have been groups, people doing these things for millennia with no notion of that term.
Of course.
So, because they have their own name for their
Their own
traditions,
names,
and there's unique aspects to those traditions. So the Western European fairy tradition is no exception. It has been persecuted, it has been somewhat fragmented, but has stayed fairly cohesive throughout that. And the literature within it, because writing goes back further in Europe than it does in some of the
other
traditional cultures, there is more record of what has been done in the past. And we can see how it's manifesting now. And it is a living tradition. And like all living traditions, the fairy tradition is a living tradition. And like all living traditions, it changes, it grows, it evolves. The only traditions that don't change are dead traditions.
Right.
One more thing about tradition, and this was something I learned from one of my main teachers in the fairy tradition, Bob R.J. Stewart. He said that tradition, by definition, is anonymous. If you can go back to where it began, it's not really a tradition. I mean, look at traditional songs. A song that's traditional means that nobody knows where it came from. It just goes back in time. It's traditional.
Right.
Traditions are like that. And so to speak of modern traditions, they're named after people. Let's use a few popular ones right now. There's the Gardnerian traditions. There's the Alexandria traditions and so on. It would be more proper to speak of the ways and practices begun by or taught by or pioneered by Gerald Gardner or Alex Sanders or whomever that particular teacher is, rather than call it a tradition. Although around the early 1970s, Raymond Buckland was one of the first people who turned that whole idea on its head intentionally when he developed what he called the Sax Wicca tradition, Saxon witchcraft. And he said, okay, while all the other people are arguing about whose tradition is the oldest and most ancient, I'm just going to come right out and say it. Mine's the newest.
This will be simple.
Because I just made it up before I wrote this book.
So I'm going to ask a question of the layman, the person who's not into the Wicca and the magic and just has been attracted to our show and wants to learn more. So when they hear the word fairy, they think Tinkerbell.
Tinkerbell sometimes gets short shrift among people that are very serious about fairy magic. And it almost seems oxymoronic to think of serious fairy magic workers. Because I've never met a completely serious fairy. They always have their tongue planted firmly in their cheek, possibly in yours. And they tend not to take themselves or humans too seriously. And in addition, they tend to like to take people who do take themselves too seriously down a peg or two.
Oh, yes.
Oh, we like that.
Yes.
Yeah, so they have a slightly different idea of dignity than humans do. They tend to see dignity as being more about being kind and respectful to others and self. So back to popular views of fairy. Many people now, they hear the word fairy and they tend to think of the Victorian idea of little flower fairies, which are these little girlies in the 90s who are going from flower to flower, and they're painting the flowers and they're doing good deeds and they're always chipper and they giggle and they tinkle and stuff, which could be taken two ways. Probably both are accurate.
Truly.
But
Truly.
But that has almost nothing to do with the original tradition. You go back in ancient tradition, and the fairy folk are often human size or larger.
Ooh.
They can be male or female. They aren't always depicted with wings. They tend to be very mischievous, often playing pranks on humans,
Yes.
often seeking what in the tales appears to be retribution for a perceived slight. Those stories can be interpreted numerous ways. There's also something very erotic about the realm of fairy, but not in the sense of human, in the human
Right.
The way the humans
sense.
think.
The way humans think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to be a porn shoot. It's something else entirely. And then getting back to Tinkerbell, you mentioned Tinkerbell. In some ways, she could be seen as an almost prototypical fairy, even though she does fit. She's usually depicted as rather
Tiny.
diminutive, about Barbie doll size. She's or smaller. In the old plays, she was portrayed by a spot of light on the back of the stage.
Right.
That's right.
Right, yeah.
But if you look at her relationship to Peter throughout J.M. Barrie's stories, and a lot of people aren't aware that Disney did not come up with Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell
Right.
goes back to J.M. Barrie's play and later novel, Peter
Right.
Pan, Peter and Wendy. And Tinkerbell is connected with Peter in an interesting way. She's his best friend. She's his soulmate. She's also his spiritual teacher, his protector.
Yes.
She is fiercely dedicated to him and connected to him. She would kill for him. She would die for him. It was said that Peter, as the boy who will never grow up, that he was without a heart. Well, Tinkerbell was his missing heart. She was
Oh.
his soul and his soulmate. And within the fairy ways of looking at things, the soulmate is an inner being. It is one's inner spiritual
Yes.
counterpart.
All right.
What in the ballads and in the lore would be the fairy lover or the fairy consort.
How do the fairies want to interact with human beings? Or do they want to? Do some of them not want to interact with human beings?
Yes to both.
Hmm.
There are fairies that really want nothing to do with human beings, and can't say I entirely blame them.
I've had
They're
those
human
moments.
beings
Yeah.
who don't want to interact with human beings.
Yes.
Yeah, usually they will not be seen on the surface of the earth, and maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about seeing fairies, about their nature.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about what they aren't. We talked a little bit about Tinkerbell. But to say exactly what fairies are is almost impossible, because to use a term like exactly in connection with fairy, it's like trying to pour smoke from one bottle to another. It's not going to work very well, because the moment you try to define them, they will start showing up in a way that defies the definition. That's just their nature.
So they're
It will-
reinventing themselves constantly.
Yeah, so you could say they're not the little tiny flower fairies flitting from flower to flower. Well, then they could just decide, what the heck, we're going to show up as little tiny maidens flitting from flower to flower.
So there.
So there, pretty much. So if they want to show up that way, they can. Or some of the popular art nowadays that has them as stripy, tight little gothy girls, and they can show up that way if they want to too.
I think you're helping me with my Halloween costume.
Do they make humans fairies? Because there were all the ancient stories of stealing fairies stealing babies. They got a bad rap as
The
well.
changeling tradition. We're getting way ahead into some of the stuff that doesn't get talked about very much.
Ooh,
That's
okay.
us. We
Yeah.
like to do that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait. Did you finish your
Yeah,
thoughts?
please,
Yeah.
please go.
About who or what are the fairies? Basically, they're said to be of an order between physical and spirit.
Okay.
So there's something in between. They They are normally invisible. They can become very, very visible in such a way that they seem to blend in with crowds. People can mistake them for human.
Oh, that
can
might
show-
explain some things in my life.
They can show that way if they want to.
So they might be-
I feel I've really witnessed that a few times.
Can we talk
Yes.
to them, or is it just like,
We can talk with them. So they tend to be normally or ordinarily invisible. They can appear in ways that seem very, very physical, or that if you're really paying attention to them, can be kind of confusing. It's physical, but it's not physical. It's physical, but not in the way that other things are physical, or it's spirit, it's imaginal, but not in the way that other things are spirit, imaginal. Basically, they can be regarded as our closest allies, cousins, and co-walkers on this planet. There's one line of thought that says that millennia ago, we had a common ancestor. We had a common ancestor and took off on two lines of evolution, one in this outer physical world and one in the inner worlds where wouldn't have to deal with the density and the slow
Of the
move,
physical.
the slow motion manifestations of the physical.
Right.
And yet, even within that, as much as a lot of fairies are, for want of a better word, dismayed at what humans have been making of the earth, the devastations that
Yeah.
nature has seen on so many fronts, the possible suicidal trajectory that the human race has been on.
Fairies that was powerful. Fairies dismayed by the suicidal trajectory of humans.
Yeah, and that message has been coming through, it turns out, for quite a long time.
Yes. I would say that of other spirit beings as well.
Yeah, well,
Unless they're
They're-
considered fairy too. I'm not sure.
yeah. There's an interesting link that a few people in the last few decades have noticed between modern UFO phenomena and the fairy traditions.
ooh,
Basically, everything within the encounters, within the beings that are encountered, are the same as what was happening in the Middle Ages and before in the fairy traditions. Fairy abductions, missing time,
missing time? Yeah.
beings with big heads and almond eyes, and interesting and unusual sexual encounters, and messages warning the human race of a impending destruction. This has been going on for a long time. It's still going on. The message hasn't changed. John Keel, the author of the Mothman Prophecies,
Yes.
and a number of other books, and a very interesting journalist who participated in a lot of the phenomena that he wrote about, he said that the messages about the possible destruction of humanity on the earth, this has been playing for a long time like a broken record. And he came to even feel that what people are tapping into when they tap into that message is a bit like a broken record, that this is something that just keeps playing over and over. And he coined the term Disneyland of the gods for the way these beings seem to toy with humans.
Ooh, all right.
That's interesting. That you just said that we meet them in because yesterday I had like the most interesting encounter with I thought he was a homeless man, but I don't think he was. But he actually had a medallion. It was a Metatron. I've never seen it before.
Metatron's cube.
Yeah,
The
Metatron's cube.
Flower of life.
The Metatron. It was Metatron's
it's
cube.
similar.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd never seen that before, and he was asking if he was hungry, so I happened to have a Cliff Bar and gave him some water, and then he came over and started talking to me and just started talking about the destruction of Earth and all the planets out there, and I was just enraptured just listening to him, and then I had to go into the store to get my stuff for my animals, and then when I came back, he was gone, which I had heard him going to go get a ride, or somebody was going to come pick him up, but it was like such an interesting encounter, and I was like, I got to pay attention. This is for me, especially with the Metatron's cube, which I'd never heard of before. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I wonder if and he looked. Well, I mean, in my mind, it's like he looked like a fairy. And he said he was a physicist, and yeah, he said he was a physicist.
Interesting. Well, among modern UFO phenomena are the round twirling lights that appear like metallic ships.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then when they land, they leave these interesting rings where they take off.
Right.
Basically, what paralleled in the old traditions of the fairy rings, the fairy circles, and the circle dance, which could be very, very fast. It can be like a whirl of light, which also links into the idea of, as humans, only part of us is physically manifested. That the bulk of who we are could be seen as soul, deeper self,
Yes.
higher self. But like an iceberg, what we experience in physical manifestation is just the tip of
It's
that
just
iceberg.
that.
That most of us is non-physical. And there's a popular idea on this sort of, the ladder model of reincarnation, that when we're in the inner realms between incarnations, then we're there. But then when we come here, we basically sort of die to that realm, and we're not there anymore, and so we're in this realm, and then we go back. No, we never leave that realm.
I disagree.
We
we
never
never
leave
do.
that
Yeah.
realm.
Yeah.
The deeper you is always there. And sometimes it is possible to be in direct communication with that deeper you, and to know when you are in alignment with that deeper you.
Yes.
And you have an infallible guidance system for that. Infallible guidance system. Every human being is born with an infallible guidance system. A lot of what I do in readings and teaching is to get people to tune into that and to recognize it.
Yes.
And it never breaks down, and it never goes wrong, and it can always be trusted. And it's simply how you feel. How you feel. Because your feelings, your emotions, your sense of feeling good, feeling bad, are a measure of just one thing. And that's the distance between you, that inner you, that deeper soul you, and the physical you, the conscious mind that we express in day-to-day life. Among the Irish and the Scots, the Gaelic-speaking folk, the fairy folk have traditionally been known as the She, among other names. Among the Anglo-Saxon and Germanic-speaking people, they're known as the Alfar, the Elven folk.
Oh, yeah.
And the main difference between elf and fairy is Gaelic versus Anglo-Saxon. Actually, fairy is from the French. Faerie, which is fey-like, which comes from the Latin fata, the fates.
Oh.
All right.
So,
Are the gosh, there's so much. Are we then? Would you say that this is an illusory life that we're living? Meaning,
course.
this isn't nearly a reality. The reality is actually what we are as spirit and consciousness.
in a sense, it's just a different reality. But when you start using
phase of
when
reality.
you start using terms like reality, it could be said that the only thing that's real is consciousness,
Is
awareness.
consciousness. All right.
And
Right.
that everything else is just appearance, and appearance reduces to substance and spectacle. And substance is what we attribute emotional connection or
Yes.
importance to, and spectacle is pretty much everything else.
Considering our last conversation, this is fascinating. All right. Yes.
So we were talking about the inner you soul,
Yes.
psyche, to use the old Greek term, but it doesn't quite equate to the same thing that modern psychology uses the term.
The egoic mind.
Is a bit distinct from the psyche.
All
the
right.
psyche is the
All right.
soul.
All
the
right.
psyche
So
is-
the psyche
Yeah,
is the
psyche
soul.
is
All right.
Greek. Anima is the
I was
Latin
gonna
term,
say, yeah.
and modern
the
term we think
the
of the
atma, where that then got developed by the Greeks into the atmos and the atom eventually.
Mm. So the soul part of you is the greater part of you.
Yes. All right.
And then there's the physically manifested you, and they're both happening at the same time.
All right.
You're not either alive or dead. You're alive and alive.
And alive. All
You're,
right.
you're so when you hear something, when you experience something, when you see something, and you feel bad about it, is because your thought about it at that moment is different from your deeper soul's thought about it.
Oh, so it's in conflict.
You're in conflict with yourself.
All right.
Bad feeling is
Right.
always conflict with self. Somebody insults you, somebody says something bad about you, you feel bad. Why? Because your inner self knows that that's not true. Your inner self adores you. Basically, your inner self also adores the person who's insulting you at the same moment.
At the same time. Yes.
And sees
Yes.
things completely differently. So that in terms of fairy communication, and in terms of magic, fairy magic, because the fairy folk, the She, tend to be a rather fun-loving, joyous bunch, and because when they're in connection with us, they are connected with us there in that place of pure joy, because they are there in that vortex, because where the light is spinning, that's where we find them. So when we're feeling joyful, when we're feeling good, the communication tends to go rather easy. When we're feeling bad, it feels distant.
Disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you're dealing with when you're dealing with a fairy ally or an ally among the living creatures, plant, animal, mineral spirits, mineral spirits like baby oil. But
I was going to say, or Jägermeister. I don't know why that popped into my mind.
yet another spirit.
Yeah. Another discussion.
And by the way, judicious uses of alcohol and occasionally other consciousness-altering entertainment substances can thin the veils a bit to make the
Yes.
communication
I can
easier.
see that.
But only to a point. If you do so much, you go blotto. Then not so much.
Then you're
Yeah,
just-
it's not helping
You're
at
just
all.
in another realm of sleep.
Yeah, not so much. So when you're feeling good, you're connected with your own inner self. Magic, manifestation happens very quickly in that state, and fairy connection happens very easily in that state. When you feel distant from that, manifestation of what you want takes longer. Stuff you
Longer.
don't want starts showing up
Showing
more.
up. Yes. Yes. All right.
And
Great.
the connection with your allies in the inner world seems to be disconnected, broken, distant, but nobody really moved. Nobody really moved. It's just that your attention is elsewhere, and you're, well, to use, you're not in the vortex with your deeper self, and your fairy allies aren't going to leave you here. They're not going to leave the vortex. They'll reach out, but they're not going to step down their own vibration to connect with a vibration
No.
that's low. That's why they can seem distant, but they'll do everything they can to reach out.
Why would they not I think in terms of that too, that we're to connect with spirit, to me, is to raise your vibration.
Yeah.
There are things you can do to raise your
Oh, yeah.
vibration. Why would they not lower theirs? What happens, or what is
They
the
would be
sense of
they would be
things?
vibrating their own nature, they would be violating their own nature to do
Alright.
that, because
Okay.
their nature is naturally on what we consider a much higher
higher.
vibration. And I want to kind of touch on that for about a minute.
Okay.
When talk about high vibration and low vibration, that can sound so ethereal, and like,
New
how
agey.
do I do that? Do I have to hum ohms and maybe the vibration will get me up to a high. It's a lot simpler than that. You can tell where your vibration is at by a very simple measure. How are you feeling? You feeling good? Feeling happy? You're vibrating
Higher
pretty high.
vibration,
The
all right.
better you feel, the higher you're vibrating. The worse you feel, the lower you're vibrating. Simple as that. And that vibration, again, it's a measure of the distance between inner you and outer you, which is also a measure of the distance between your allies in the fairy realms, if you're working with that, and where you're at in this physical plane. Now, it's not a literal distance. It's just a distance in terms of vibration. It's like they're broadcasting on 107 FM, and if you're vibrating on 56 AM, you're not going to be in the range to pick up on the communication.
Now, you said if you leave that their area, they're not going to leave, but you said they will reach out to you. How?
Oh, yeah.
How do they? I'm curious. Is that
it'll be varied in various ways. Around about a decade and a half ago, I was involved in a relationship that ended in a very sad way, and my fairy, my primary ally, my consort, my love in that world, she suddenly seemed very, very distant. Very, very distant. And there were ways that she would try to get my attention. And looking back, I can see that. It was hard to see at the time. I mean, she would make it really obvious. Like shortly after that time, the Heart of Fairy Oracle came out, which was Brian and Wendy Froud's deck. It was Brian's second deck. It's brilliant, highly recommended, as his first, the Fairies Oracle. I was feeling so distant. I saw it when it came out, and I was like, yeah, okay, and I just kept going. Well, a short time after that, it showed up drastically discounted, and in a way that it's like she was saying, "Come on, I'll pay for it for you. Come on." And even then, it took me a long time to open it up, and it turned out to be a beautiful representation of what she was trying to communicate at that time. I mean, it's almost like this was tailor-made for my experience.
It all but said your name, and this is for you, Dennis.
Pretty much.
Great. Amazing.
But what I found was this started coming together when I asked her one day after we had really gotten into the groove again. And so I sat down, and I knew how to communicate with Fairy in a pretty clear way. And I asked my Fairy, where were you? What happened? Why did it seem so distant? Why was our communication seem to be broken when I needed you the most? And at that moment, my sense of her, my sense of Fairy, my sense of connection with the other worlds just seemed to disappear. Just boom, like I'm just sitting in the floor, and it was very disconcerting.
Whoa.
And a moment later, I heard very distinctly in my left ear, "Dennis, I'm still here." It was her voice, and then the lights came back on. The inner lights, the sense of it came back on, and it was basically a way of saying that she never left. She never left. It was my letting my vibration drop, letting myself
go through
wallow in that.
Go through your emotional turmoil, basically.
Yeah.
Nothing present.
And to eventually learn that there are better ways of handling it than the ways I handled it.
Then dropping out.
Yeah.
That leads me into wanting to ask about the Life Force Tarot energetics.
Yeah, that evolved. That's
Your
evolved.
work.
That's evolved since then. That's evolved in the last 15 years or so.
Right.
And tarot, I first got involved in tarot when I was 13 years old.
No wonder you were such a good teacher. My goodness.
I had seen a James Bond movie called Live and Let Die, and Jane Seymour plays a tarot reader in that one.
Does he? Oh, God, I
Jane
really got to
Seymour,
see these.
yeah.
Oh, Jane Seymour. I love her.
Yeah,
Okay.
she plays a tarot reader named Solitaire. So it's about a little over 10 minutes into the film, and suddenly the scene switches to a tabletop like this one, and you see cards being laid out on the table. A man is coming. He crosses the waters. He brings destruction. And it's basically she is doing the reading for the bad guys.
Oh, like tipping
about Bond coming over.
Oh,
Right.
To where they're at. She's So that when she first meets him, she's, he introduces himself, name's Bond, James Bond. He says, I know who you are, what you are, and why you've come. You won't succeed.
Oh.
Yes.
And he's like,
I
you must have a
remember that.
remarkable intelligence apparatus. And just like, the cards have followed you for me. He goes, yes, that's a most remarkable deck. Am I in there? And she fans them out and says, pick one. And he pulls out the Fool. And she goes, you have found yourself. So that was my intro to tarot when I was 13. Around that time, the Scholastic Book Club
Yeah.
Loved that.
offered a set of the major arcana. That was my first tarot deck.
Mine
Not at my
too.
school.
That was mine
Not at my
too.
school.
Oh my gosh. And then I got scared of it and threw it away.
Well, the fun thing about this particular deck was this was in the early 70s,
Wow.
and it would had the design, it had the name of the card, and then forget which was on the top, which was on the bottom. It had the name on the card, and then it had the name of a popular song that kind of linked into the
Yes.
theme.
Oh.
Oh my
So for the
gosh.
Fool, it was the
Yeah.
Fool on the Hill.
Yeah.
For the Moon, it was Bad Moon Rising. For the Devil, it was Sympathy for the Devil.
Oh, I love that.
For the Wheel of Fortune, it was Big Wheel. So
Great. Now I got that in my head now.
by the mid 80s, we were, in the Reagan era, and schools were changing a bit and what was being allowed into the schools. In the early 70s, a lot of experimentation in
Some-
schools,
yeah,
and they were a lot
lot,
more
yeah.
open to...
Even Catholic school? Not Catholic school, though.
I don't know about Catholic
I don't know.
school.
You're like, no.
Can't help you there.
Yes, that was my world.
So eventually got a Rider-Waite deck and started learning more on my own. Eventually found a very good teacher out here in Sherman Oaks who taught me how to use it. I mean, I've been using it on my own, learning it, studying it, doing readings for people, but not in any way that was, very open or public. And
Birthday
then-
parties and hangouts.
And then a wonderful woman named Linda K. Marchena, she became my primary tarot teacher. She was doing readings out here at Psychic Eye in Sherman Oaks,
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
which at the time was a very thriving bookstore, teaching center, and so on. So this was late 80s, early 90s. And she pretty much got me up to speed on how to use this to actually work with people and help people.
Beautiful. My parents, it's so interesting to me when I think about my parents, and again, Mom in particular was a Christian, but there wasn't a lot of judgment really about the tarot and so forth. It was a more open and middle of the road thinking, and maybe I would attribute that to being going from the 60s into the 70s, because I also had something called the Eye of the Kabbalah. It was sold as a game, and the eye would turn, and it came with tarot cards.
Oh wow!
And separate from the game, I started doing readings for Mom and for friends and so forth. And then
Beautiful.
there was a kind of a whole thing too in the 70s about being a born again Christian in a very different way than it's discussed now. But it was, it was like, go back to the Bible, go back to the teachings, and why are you using cards and things like this? And that's what was scary to me. And so I threw all of that out. And yet, everything about intuition and using literature actually to know yourself, to know thyself was very, very important. So I just find this really fascinating how it depends on the age you come in. I think I never let go of that spirituality because it was so open and Jesus was inclusive.
Yeah.
So is inclusive, as a matter of fact.
Originally, Jesus was very inclusive. The
Yes.
early Christian church, since the discovery of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts in Israel in the 1940s, and they've eventually published in the 70s, and
Yes.
these were the books of the Bible that were not included in the Orthodox canon, that were burned, desecrated by the church, but managed to survive in little pots in the
Little
back of a cave.
pots, yes.
And eventually were found, and people suspected that there must have been some literature like this. It finally showed up and got a greater glimpse of what the early church was really all about. And basically, the early church in the first century was an Asian mystery religion.
We have gone back around, and we're coming back to Life Force Tarot Energetics. You've created this. It's a system.
Yes. And in true fairy parlance, we are not doing things in a linear way. We're working in spirals.
Yes.
In the oldest
spirals.
goddess and fairy traditions,
Yes.
which go together.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely.
It has been said that Elfame is another name for the goddess. So
Elfame.
the fairy
I like
lands and
it.
the lady are one and the
Well,
same.
Miss of Avalon, that was, I think the first time I've ever really heard about the fairy lands. That she was.
Morgana, the goddess Morgana, who's called Morgan
Yeah.
Le Fay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Le Fay, no coincidence.
Yeah,
No.
there we go.
Because she was a fairy woman that there is a lot of fairy lore in the Arthurian legends, and at the end of all the stories, no matter pretty much which version you go by, he's taken off to Avalon, to the fairylands, by Morgana Le Fay
I
and
love
her sister fairy queens.
Yeah. Oh. I just got a happy feeling. I really do think that's who I'm going to have to dress up for this Halloween.
She's over there thinking about her costume. Okay.
The fairies have told me.
So how do you use Life Force Tarot Energetics?
Well, Life Force Tarot, which I added the energetics on just because just saying Life Force Tarot, people didn't always realize that this is basically a system of magic. So energetics seemed as good a word as any, because a lot of it did have to do with focusing energy through the stillness of the present moment. And the roots of it came during readings. I'd be doing a reading for somebody, and sometimes they would ask a question, or they would go in a direction that was pretty unorthodox. And for about a moment, I would think, I don't know how to do that. And then the question would come up, can we do this? And then the download would come, let's do this. So those ways became the ways I actually did it. And eventually I came to the point where I was still teaching tarot classes, but they were pretty much the way I had taught them in the early 90s. And I realized I wasn't really doing it that way anymore, that this had evolved quite a bit. Okay, time to teach it the way I actually do it, because it's a lot more effective than some of the older ways. It's still very traditionally based. There's still a lot of that old ways of, mixing and cutting the cards and connecting with the client or querent. I like that old word.
The querent.
Ooh,
Oh, yes.
Basically
New word for
the
me.
questioner.
Yes.
So connecting with the querent or yourself. But it's a lot more direct. And one of the questions that came up was, if you do a reading for somebody, let's say past, present, future. Past is pretty much, we know what the past is. We've been there, so it's kind of fixed. The present, we know what it is. That's what we're looking at. And then the future is always potential. So past, present, future. The future is potential. It's not fixed in stone. Like I used to say, at most, it's only fixed in cardboard. People can change their minds. They can change their trajectories. But sometimes things just seem inevitable, like there's no way out of this. Well, if you look at the future and you don't like it, what can you do? That's where bringing magic and energy work in a very direct way came in. It was a way of sometimes literally moving the trajectory onto another timeline entirely.
Oh.
Which when it's done, and it can be done in the space of a reading, it can be done in the space sometimes of a few minutes. And it can entail sometimes a whole new look at the future. So get those cards out of the way. They obviously
let's
don't
look
apply
at
them. And sometimes even the
possibilities,
past changes. That's where things get pretty weird. And the
Yeah.
present. People go outside and things that aren't there anymore.
See?
To the point where
Yes.
at one point, after working with this for a few years, there was a point where I was able to literally watch a memory shift, where remembering things one way, but that memory just suddenly receded into kind of like this strange background because a different memory just stepped in because something happened differently.
They call that I've heard it called the
Mandala effect.
Yeah, because I've been having a lot of those and going, you don't remember this? Really? Seriously? I know I'm not losing my mind completely, but
How come I'm the only one remembering something?
Yeah.
I consider it setting a different intention. And sometimes, depending on what people are holding on to, it seems to me right there in the room while I'm doing the reading, I say, let's set a different intention.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back or call back or whatever and say, I didn't even have to do, I thought there was going to be a lot of work for me, but something in the past changed clearly and then it shifted the consciousness of the present moment so that you felt more effortless or more ease in shifting your thinking on something so that then there's a change.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that that's just all on one level. That's layers to me of consciousness.
It's layers of consciousness. To go back to what we were talking about earlier, you definitely have to get in alignment with your deep self to do that. Mm-hmm. You have to be in a good space, because once you're in this place, you're also in a place of pure potential where anything can happen, and often does.
So
that is true too.
So where can we get these? Can we buy these? These life force.
It's not a deck. Life Force Tarot is basically it's a magical system. I do teach it from time to time. Okay. I teach sort of a brief version of just the magical part of it in the 1 or 2 evening class that's come to be called Tarot and Natural Magic. Okay. Because it is natural magic. It's working with what is. It's very simple. It doesn't involve a whole lot of accessories, although tarot decks are just seem to go along with it pretty well. And then there is a larger body of this that involves the lore of the tarot, practical use of the tarot, that involves a lot of things around it. Seeing and perceiving energy, seeing and perceiving energetic beings within this world, using the tarot for meditation to go into other worlds to connect with the archetypes that we find in the major arcana and sometimes in the minor arcana, to use tarot for deep magic, but also to go into the basis of how to actually help people with tarot, and how to be flexible with it, how to stay within the structure when it's need be, and how to deviate from the structure and know when to do that. And also the ethics behind all that, how to use it to help people, not to the way there are some who use these things to manipulate, to deceive, to extort large quantities of money from people. It's not about that. It's not about it. We do a service. And if you do a service, it's okay to get paid for it, but not to the point where you're gonna
hawk something.
People, the standard thing. It's like doing the reading. We've heard about. I've known people who've gone through this. Somebody does the reading for them and then says, "Oh, but there's a curse on you," or somebody's working against you. We can burn a candle for that. The small candle, that's only $60. It's not so effective. But the tall candle, the $500 candle, that's the one. Prices might have gone up, and a lot of and
probably have.
Yeah, you can recognize a lot of the places that do this. They're the empty storefronts, and now they're just discovered this recently. They're offering very expensive chakra balancings at these places too.
Oh, good to know.
It's like your chakras are misaligned, but we can do the 250 balancing if you come in for. Anyway, that's the way. Some of the ways that people abuse this kind of thing.
Right.
But not the peoples I surround myself with.
Not the people we surround ourselves
absolutely.
with. There is an ethical way to use all these things, just as there are Just as, there are people who do ethical medicine, and then there was, the people in World War II who were doing horrible experiments at concentration camps. It doesn't reflect on the entire healing field. It just means that how you use things.
You can abuse.
You can use and you can abuse.
Yes.
So watch me segue.
Yes.
So now I love your philosophy. So if I wanted to take a class or if I wanted a reading from you, where could I find you?
Okay.
And do you have upcoming events?
Yes.
Do I have upcoming events? We have upcoming events. By the way, my wife and I, we do music.
That's right.
We have a sound. It's sound healing, but it's also fairy journeying.
Oh my God.
they're
beautiful.
Oh, okay, I'm there.
All in one. It's called the Mists of Oran Mor.
Oh, yes.
Mists
All
of
right.
Oran Mor. Oran Mor,
Beautiful.
O-R-A-N, second word Mor, M-O-R. Oran Mor, it's Gaelic for the great song. It's the great song of the cosmos.
Ooh.
And we do those events around the Pasadena area, also out in Upland, usually at yoga centers and healing arts centers. You can find our Facebook page, Mists of Oran Mor. On the events page there, we list everything that's coming up.
Could you do an event at somebody's house?
We have.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good to know.
we've done birthday parties. We've done we've done private events. It's a lot
Okay.
of fun.
Tremendous.
And then so we would find you there, or do you have another website?
You could find me there. Usually, for contacting us, you could contact us. You could contact us for the Mists of Oran Mor. You can contact me for fairy events. We also do Faerie Magick circles out in. Lately, it's out in Upland at a place called Waking Universe,
Ooh.
which is a very magical place, and the people that run it are deeply connected with fairy as well as with modern psychic research.
Ooh, nice.
There's a lot
Great
going
to
on
hear
in there.
about.
They also do film production out there. It's a pretty interesting place, and so that's where the Faerie Magical circles are. That's where I've lately been teaching the Life Force Tarot Energetics full 2-month courses, and good things are happening.
Lots of fun stuff.
So you can find Mists of Oran Mor. You can also find, for more fairy oriented stuff, there's a Facebook page called Fairy Initiation, and that's Faerie Initiation, one of the older spellings of fairy.
All right.
And then for more tarot oriented stuff, I have a page, it's Dennis George Rudolph, Life Force Tarot Energetics.
There you go. We'll be
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh, one more thing. If people want to contact me directly,
Yes.
DennisGeorgeRudolph@gmail.com.
Oh, there you go.
Great.
And we plan to put this all on our description. So,
There we go.
Yes, we have that.
so is somebody going to do a tarot card reading?
Do you want to? I was thinking, I shall defer to my tarot teacher. You could read for Sheila Marie.
Sheila Marie always loves.
Sheila Marie's secrets are about to become very, very public.
Oh yeah,
yes.
I've always been
if
an
you
open
wanted-
book.
So that's up to you. A card that Fairy would want us to.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's actually. There we go.
So
So, yes, let's draw a card that the Fae would want us
okay.
to see and
Okay.
understand.
Give me a moment on this one. There it is.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
love when that happens. Oh,
There
oh,
she is.
So-
Oh, my goodness.
High Priestess.
she flew
I-
out of there.
The High Priestess. The High
I'm
Priestess.
Dizzy as can be. Okay.
The second arcanum in the major arcana. Arcanum, just an old word meaning secret. Arcana, plural, secrets. So the major arcana, the big secrets. The High Priestess in the tarot represents goddess energy, represents the feminine archetype, represents yin. Among many other things, you can go in so many directions and so deep with the High Priestess. She is lunar energy, the moon, the fifth fairy element, moonlight. She is intuition. She is female intuition. Whether you're male or female, she is the way of contacting your deeper inner self, the way of contacting fairy, the way of contacting goddess, the way of contacting source. She's the one who hides the secrets and reveals them. She is the one who veils the waters of the unconscious mind and pulls the veils aside. She is the one who sits between the pillars of creation and destruction, between the light and the dark, the right and the left, the up and the down.
She cruises the light and shadow, in other words.
She cruises the light and shadow.
Sorry, I had to fit that in there.
Thank you.
She's the lunar lady. She has the phases of the moon on her crown. She has the moon at her feet.
She's the past, the present, and the future.
And she's very much pointing the way to your soul, pointing the way to fairy. She's saying, use some tarot terms, she's saying set aside the sword's mind. Sword's mind is the rational, analytical mind. It's useful. It's useful. But when you're going into the inner realms of the soul, you have to go with the cup's mind. So, because the sword's mind slices, divides, sees things as linear, sees things as straight ahead, makes sudden turns. Sword's mind is good for defining and analyzing, but it's only one way of looking at things. So when you're connecting with the deep inner realms, when you're connecting with soul, when you're connecting with fairy, when you're connecting with goddess and feminine intuition and female wisdom, you're connecting with the cup's mind. You're connecting with what some call the right side of the brain. You're connecting with the heart. You're connecting with your deeper soul. Once you come back from fairy, if you like, you can bring the sword's mind back into it. You can analyze it, if you like. Be careful of accidentally invoking some of the magic killing spells. There are spells that are very effective for killing magic. There's one that people use quite a bit, and that's, they say things like, it's just a whatever. It's just a coincidence. It's just my imagination. It's just something. It's just
But
a dream.
that'll never
It's
happen.
just... And these things sound so logical when they say them. And yet, if you look at the etymology of the word coincidence, go ahead, break it down. Co, with, incident, something happened with something else. It says nothing about causality, lack of causality, synchronicity, or anything else. All it just says is something happened with something else. It's not an explanation at all. Imagination has been derogated to the bottom of the barrel in modern pseudoscientific reasoning. The best scientists know better than this, but a lot of popular people thinking about science, they think, there's the scientific way, and then if I use this other way of thinking about it, that's just my imagination. Imagination is the clairsenses. It's the way we perceive in the inner realm. William Blake basically said that what we perceive with the imagination, that is the reality. That is the deeper reality. Everything out here is just a later reflection of that. And there's a lot to be gleaned from tapping into that. This is what the High Priestess is communicating today. What do you think?
I agree.
Well, that's
absolutely.
As I was driving in, the phrase ran through my head. There's no coincidences, and I was like, "Why did that pop into my head?" There you go.
That's very yes. What you just said, I heard yesterday and today. There have been several things I heard yesterday and I'm hearing today. So things are coming back around. Yes, she's flow. She's the past, present, and the future, and she sits between the shadow and the light, where there is pure balance and pure understanding. You can get to the heart of things from coalescing and working through your shadow and your light. It's a powerful place to be.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, and you do have to come back.
Yes, we have so much more to talk about.
You're Yes, you're a compendium for sure of knowledge. I've always known that. So, we're going to go ahead and close.
I thought, because that was perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you
was
so
everything
much.
we needed right there.
Wow, that was amazing.
you.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Sheila and Nana.
Thank you, Paul Preston, for being our engineer. Thank you, David Shostak and Flute Sonics, for your music.
And Allison Warner for your help with social media and
Life.
technical things. Yes, other things
Yes.
technical.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us in Cruising in the Light and Shadow.
My name is Anana Moon.
I'm Sheila Keecha-Marie, reminding you that love is everywhere. Our lives touch everyone and everything. Please go forth in love.
Sat Nam.